Hello, my name is Gene Monterastelli, and I am the editor of TappingQA.com. And the video that you are about to watch is an interview that I did as part of the 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping was a free event, which was a fundraiser for the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network provides training and trauma relief tools to those in war-torn countries, as well as working with refugees all over the world. They've been able to help out over 200,000 people all over the world. After you watch this video, if you find this video something that was useful, the very easy way that you can say thank you to the guest for giving their time and sharing their expertise is to go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support and make a small contribution to support the Peaceful Heart Network. Again, that is 24hoursoftapping.com/support, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Next up is Kris Ferraro. Kris is an energy coach, a speaker, an author specializing in areas of anxiety, grief, and creative blocks. She teaches a diverse groups on how purpose, faith, and balanced energy are ancient antidotes to the stress of the modern life. Her first book, Energy Healing: Simple and Effective Practices to Become Your Own Healer, introduces new audiences to the field of energy psychology, including EFT. Her latest book, Manifesting: The Practical Simple Guide to Creating a Life That You Want, distills 10 years of the best metaphysical teachings. And that introduction just does not do this person justice. Please welcome to our virtual stage, my friend, Kris Ferraro. Good evening, Kris.
10 hours in, but I'm getting prime Gene. I know. You're
absolutely
get your stride going, right?
You fortunately, you did not have me after we did 45 minutes of tapping for better sleep. So we're in a circumstance that we can navigate this in a beautiful way. What part of the world are you in right now? I know you're traveling currently.
I'm in Portland, Maine.
Excellent. So I loved your title, Emotional Alchemy. One of the questions that I've been asking our folks as we've started into all of this is I've been asking people about their origin story. And I don't mean origin story where your superpowers came from or where you're introduced to tapping, but origin story for the topic at hand. So I would love to hear from you to start with. When you use the term emotional alchemy, what does that mean for you? And how did you land in a place that was something that was interesting and fascinating to you?
Well, I think it started as many people's stories start, as being a highly sensitive person born into an insensitive environment and having a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions and not really knowing what to do with them. And actually not knowing what to do with them is what led me to be a writer, because I started writing at age 8 because it was a place to put my feelings. And so having that space, I developed a lot of coping mechanisms that have ended up really, fueling me forward in my career in many different ways. And yet what I found in my work, I've been tapping for 20 years. I also was 15 years as a counselor in a nonprofit, is I started discovering a lot of things about my emotional energy and the emotional energy of just about everybody else. And I realized that we were not hitting the mark with what we think of in popular culture about what emotional energy is and how to process it. So out of that, I was like, wow, there are all these simple truths that have simply come out of doing this work. I've been a professional practitioner now for 14 years. And so having worked now with thousands of people, students and one-on-one clients, I realized that there were certain misnomers, there were certain myths that they had bought into, and they're not the only ones that are buying into them. It's everybody else too. And so I saw that there were myths, and I saw that we didn't really understand what emotional energy is or how to process it. And so what happens is a lot of the things that we think of that we label with different diagnoses, and I don't do that, but we have them and they're out there in popular culture and people are using that terminology more and more, really is showing us what I call a log jam of too much energy, emotional energy that has not been processed, and it shows up and affects us in a lot of different ways. So out of that, I was like, I just got to start teaching people emotional alchemy, but I got to tell you what I really think of it is as emotional hygiene. We
Mhm.
come into these bodies, and as children, we're taught to brush our teeth and shower and eat and exercise and do things to take care of our physical bodies. And no one really shows us what to do with our emotional bodies. And often, what's reflected to us, things like going to happy hour, or if you have a broken heart, eating a pint of ice cream, are really dysfunctional ways of dealing with our pain.
And then it's interesting, you're like you're talking about like we're not brought into a world that teaches how to do that. Recently, I was doing a workshop and we spent 90 minutes just on all of the times that we had been told we were too much something.
Mm.
Too emotional, too dramatic, too quiet, too loud, too. And oftentimes, what that is it has nothing to do with the choice that we're making. It has everything to do with the comfort of the person who is talking to us. And they are discomforted. So they take the thing that, however we are showing up, however we are in that particular moment, and there's like, you are impacting me. It is too much. And because we're these tribal creatures that want to survive and stay inside of it, we immediately take that too much as a lesson. Oh, I can't be this. I have to do this other thing. And as you talk about, as a person who's coming from a highly sensitive temperament, it's really easy to be over dramatic, over emotional, over all of those things. And I'm guessing you're being taught that this thing that is natural to me, or this thing that is the front edge of my experience, is unsafe, unnatural, or I shouldn't be doing that particular thing.
Right. It causes all of this shame and all of this self judgment and blame. And of course, it creates these bubbles of energy that contain those painful memories that draw similar experiences to us over and over again. And that's what we're referring to when we talk about being triggered, right?
Yep.
We have some old stuff that hasn't been processed, and something shows up in our current experience that activates the feelings that weren't processed when we originally experienced them. That's what being triggered is. And I want to say that we weren't taught this because our parents weren't taught this, because our grandparents weren't taught this, because we are living in a time where we have the ability to be able to do this. And many of those generations did not. They certainly couldn't teach us what they didn't know. And
Right.
so those old ways of dealing with stress that have been so detrimental to so many people were the only things that people had access to.
And so once we recognize that as a reality, what does that then look like as we step into making choices and taking care of ourselves? Is the beginning of the process understanding the place that things are stuck inside of me and I'm struggling? Is it finding the tools to move forward? Like, what does that process look like as we emerge from an environment that is not understanding and supportive of this, to, even if we can't change our environment, we at least change our disposition and how we care for ourselves and we navigate that?
Well, when you talk about changing the environment, I'm so glad that you brought that up. We're in a very dangerous position if we expect the world to change itself to help us feel better.
Yeah.
It puts us into a position of, first of all, the world isn't going to do that.
Right.
And second of all, it puts us in a position of feeling like victims all of the time. And
Hmm.
so that's a problem. Really, this is what I'm talking about, is working from the inside out.
Yep.
Normally, we approach life from, I'll create this thing out here. And when I have that thing out here, it's going to make me feel the way I want to in here. And I'm talking about starting in here and then
Yep.
allowing what's out here to change as what's inside of us changes. And so part of what needs to be known are, what are some dangerous myths that we have about feelings?
Hmm.
One of them is that feelings are in your head. I mean, we call this field mental health. I don't actually use that term. I use
Right.
emotional well-being,
Yeah.
because our emotional bodies are our whole bodies.
Right.
That the thoughts that we have about how we're feeling, the stories that we have about how we are feeling, exists in our conscious thinking mind. But that's not where the emotional energy is. It can be in any part of us. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that talking about our problems is automatically going to make them go away. Not always. There
Right.
are certain circumstances and certain situations with people who are really good receivers and listeners that are able to receive something in that it transmutes the energy, but that is extremely rare. And there's
Mhm.
some like minor things that don't really need much more than a conversation. Sometimes when we talk about problems, it actually makes them worse because we're feeding the energy of the story that we have about it, but we're not actually accessing where those emotions are inside of us.
And I want to grab that. I love that. I want to grab a hold of that because there is a difference between processing something and just verbally spinning as we stay stuck inside of something. And it can, from the outside, those two things actually might look very, very similar, but there is a difference between me processing through what I'm experiencing and me just staying stuck in it, and I'm doing it verbally out loud, and I'm just around this amen chorus of, oh my God, it sucks so much. And your friend's like, yeah, oh my gosh, it sucks so much. And it's great to have support of people who understand what is going on, but there's a huge difference between stating what is going on and processes what is going on. And there's such a subtle difference in there. So I love that you're pointing that out in that process.
Well, because I think that automatically when we're experiencing something that doesn't feel bad, often the response is, let me reach out to someone who honestly we're just looking to agree with us.
Yeah.
So we're not really asking them to process. We want some kind of buy-in to the experience that we're having. But then we can feel more amped up. Our nervous system can be even more dysregulated after those conversations. And from an energetic standpoint, we're literally growing the energy of the very thing that we're looking to process.
So if just simply talking about the thing is the myth that doesn't always take care of the thing, then what do we do instead?
Well, one of our favorite things, right, of course, is EFT, is tapping. And yet we can start with just being present to those feelings. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I'm feeling this thing. And immediately when we're feeling something that's uncomfortable, we judge it as wrong or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately when we're feeling something that's painful, it is human nature to run as far away as we can. We move into all of those avoidance structures that I talked about earlier. And so the key is to stay in the feeling. To stop, drop, and roll is what we were taught when kids, if you're on fire, right?
Yeah.
Stop and drop into yourself and allow yourself to simply be with the feelings. The story that we have that's going on in our mind, what we're telling ourselves, why we're feeling what we're feeling, is a doorway into where the emotional energy is. And so if you can stop in something that's extremely painful, even if you can only do it for 30 seconds, even if you can only do it for a couple of minutes, and for most people, you're going to have to learn to sort of develop minutes of being able to do that. You might only in the beginning be able to do it for 10 seconds, but 10 seconds of being in a feeling is more valuable than anything else that you can do. And so when you become present to those feelings and you can drop down into the body and recognize those sensations that we're experiencing in our bodies, that is where the emotional energy is expressing itself. And so from that place, even you can become so good at this, so good at feeling your feelings, that you can literally move into that emotional energy, be present with it. Don't try to get rid of it, which is the key, but allow it with compassion and become a compassionate witness to your own experience. That emotional energy that is bound up begins to unfurl and the energy begins to flow through it. And so there's a lot of things I don't have to tap on anymore at all. I just sit with it and I can process something like that.
So as you say that, two things strike me. The first one is I think of Milton Erickson's old line, all transformation starts by stating what is. Like
Yes.
just simply say, this is what it is. And you'll notice that's not judging what is, not saying it's good, just stating what is. The second thing that I think about is at some point in the last 10 hours, I think it was somewhere in hour number 2, I was talking to Yves from a Belgian man who was in France, who we actually did a process exactly like that, where we turned into something in the body, and all we did was just extend compassion towards that thing. We found the compassion in our heart and just sent it to that thing. And what you're talking about was the exact physical experience I had when we were doing that little exercise. Is it just like just like I just feel it disintegrating and becoming less dense and moving away in that particular way. And it's really interesting. Like, compassion is such a tricky word and a triggering word for some people. Like that, like one of my phrases that I use a lot is I give myself permission to be gentle with myself, which is
Mm.
another way of talking about compassion. And I have a number of clients who bristle at that particular phrase because it feels like being gentle with myself, being compassionate towards what is going on, means I'm being permissive to the thing that has happened. And I am saying that I don't have to do the work. I don't have to get out of it. I don't have to transform. By being gentle with myself, I'm letting myself off the hook. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I can see how people misinterpret that particular thing, thinking, no, I need to get through it. I need to muscle through it. And think, no, it's okay that I feel this, even though it sucks for me to be feeling the thing that I'm feeling.
Well, I think there's a lot of judgment that we grow up around in having our feelings.
Yeah.
It's the parent that says to their child, "Don't cry." And you hinted at this earlier. It is the parent's discomfort at seeing their child in pain that wants the child to not cry, and yet crying is our built-in relief method.
Right.
It is like the steam that's coming out of the pot. Crying processes and feelings for it. We now know that it releases dopamine and serotonin in our brains after we cry. But how many times have our tears been shut down, and how many times have we shut down our own tears? How many times have tears come up in inappropriate settings, say a business meeting? I can't tell you how many times, when I worked for other people, I cried in public restrooms many times because something would come up and it would be in this moment where it wasn't the right time and place for me to express it. And I believe it was coming up at those times because I was suppressing it and pushing it down in so many other areas. And so if we, as soon as we're able to be present to a feeling, and this is what we do in EFT, we say, even though, and we state the truth, even though I am furious at this person, right?
Yep.
And we start right there. But if we believe that emotions are logical, we're going to get stuck because we're going to try to talk ourselves out of having an emotional experience. We're not even in the realm where the feelings are. So just being able to say to my clients, emotions are not logical. You get to feel however you're feeling. You get to be wherever you are at. And when I'm working with people, I'm in an elevated state of consciousness in which there is no judgment. And so what they are feeling and what they are experiencing and what has happened to them or what they've done to others is allowed to come up to the surface because of cultivating a safe space for that to happen.
One of the things I love about living in New York City is it is culturally appropriate to sit on the subway and cry to yourself. Like that's just kind of like one of the New York experiences you have at some point. And it's just like, yep, I'm the crying person on the subway today. And everybody goes, yeah, that's a crying person on the subway today. And it's just for whatever reason, like we've all gotten to the point that there's no longer the emotional baggage about that particular experience. And you can't do it in a bar and you can't do it in a restaurant. But if you're sitting on the subway for whatever reason, you're just allowed to sit there and cry to yourself. So now we give ourselves permission to go, great, this is the feeling I'm having. I'm giving myself permission to just feel that particular thing without judgment. If I'm feeling really frisky in this particular thing, I'm then able to extend a little self-compassion towards myself. So then how does the process then unfold after that?
Well, and I want to just say this, if you are judging yourself for having the feeling, that's the very first thing to tap on.
Yeah.
Even though I'm an idiot for feeling this way,
Yeah.
even though I'm pathetic, even though I can't believe I'm this many years old and still feeling like this, fill in the blanks. It's all right there to start tapping on those those self-criticisms that come up about our emotional experiences, if we can start right there, then the allowance just comes up. And anything that we resist persists. It's a very, very, very true. And that which we allow can process actually quite quickly. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we see this in babies. You can see a baby get really furious, and the baby will get all red faced and it'll ball up its fist and it'll scream at the top of its lungs. And it definitely does not care that you're online at Whole Foods. It
Right.
does not care, right? The baby's in that experience. And a minute later, that same baby will be having deep belly laughs and they're restored to their normal shade, right? And everything comes back into balance. We have shamed and judged and shunned our own selves for our emotional experiences, and of course that's been reflected back to us by cultural norms. And so that is why we can't process those things as quickly, but we can learn to process those things that quickly.
And as you say that, the two things that strike me really quickly is, number one is that fully articulated emotions are short lived. You know, giving ourselves permission to lean into that and connect that particular thing. And the second thing just slid off the back of my brain, and so we will continue on. Um,
Well, I wanted to say that, you know, people can, when I'm teaching this to clients, they'll say to me, well, you know, that's really easy for you to say you're a highly sensitive person, you're an empath, you're really in touch
yep.
with your feelings. I'm really in touch with my feelings now. I
Hmm.
lived in my head for decades.
Yeah.
um, and was and experienced everything that comes from that: depression and really, really crippling anxiety. So this was something that I had to learn for myself. But the fear that I had of my pain was so far worse than the pain itself. It
Yeah.
was so far more painful than what I had thought it was going to be. And our heads are the narrators that are in our brains, what Michael Singer calls the crazy roommates in our heads that are
Yeah.
constantly judging and cataloging and categorizing and making meaning out of things. That part of us is not really a good barometer of what is happening in our own lives. And so when we can learn that by doing the thing that feels um, not natural, by turning around and going back into our pain, it can really, really change us. You know, I had an experience where I had a cat named Lou, and he was one of the great loves of my life. I had him for 20 years. I had him through marriages and changes and moves and job changes and all of these things in my life. We kind of grew up together in many ways. And when it was time for him to, you know, got sick, he got cancer. I knew the end was going to be soon. You know, someone very close to me said, "You're the strongest person I know, and I don't know how you're going to do this." And I said, "Well, that makes two of us. I don't know how I'm going to do this either." I
Yeah.
mean, you know, this animal knows me better than I think anyone's ever known me. And so that day when I had to put him to sleep, I came back and I started busying myself, which is what we do, right? When we don't want to feel what we're feeling. Suddenly I got very productive, and I was doing laundry. And while I was doing laundry, I felt the grief come up inside of me. And I made a decision in that moment. I knew I couldn't control it. I knew I couldn't suppress it. I knew I couldn't get rid of it. I knew I couldn't manage it. I knew I couldn't negotiate with it. I gave myself over to this grief, and it rose up inside of me like a tsunami wave, and it leveled me. It brought me to my knees. And I was in one of the most visceral emotional experiences that I had ever had in my entire life. And I learned something pretty shocking, that even in the greatest pain, emotional energy that is not restricted, there's a level of ecstasy that is within it, because it is not stifled and it is not controlled and it is allowed to flow. And so this thing that I thought I would never get over, I have to tell you, I moved through that grief experience in a very different way after that. And now I think of him and love him and have pictures up and talk about him, but there's no pain there. Of course I miss him, but the grief that I was able to move through in a very quick experience of choosing to surrender to that experience taught me more than anything else I've ever done.
And as you say that, I think about a conversation that you and I had on the podcast years ago about grief. And there's something that you said that just rings in my head. I hear all the time is that grief will not abide. And
No.
when we're dealing with a force like that, that is unstoppable, the fact that you're giving yourself permission to give over to that particular emotion and just be present inside of that particular thing. You know, my friend Catherine Poole, who's a medical intuitive, would say, you know, first the universe throws feathers, then it throws elephants. One way or another, it's going to get your attention. And our
That's
emotions
good.
are that way. Like
Yes,
they're
they
going to
are.
get our attention and they have to be processed and they have to be experienced. And we have the opportunity to do it in a way where we're fully present to it. We're hearing them. We're getting the information that's coming out of it. And at the exact same time, you know, if we don't, we're going to process it. We're going to work through it in one particular way. It's all about doing it in a way that is healthy and natural and makes sense for us as we're navigating all of this.
Well, and I have to tell you, it was so freeing to not try to manage my stuff for one
Yep.
moment. I knew it was unmanageable. There's some part of me that knew better than the rest of me, that there was no part of me that could manage this experience. And so what's the worst that can happen? I spontaneously combust. I gave myself over to it. And I am forever grateful for him and his life, and then this final incredible lesson that
Mm-hmm.
came out of this experience. And so, you know, we think we're supposed to be happy all the time, and we judge some emotions as bad or wrong. And it's one spectrum. It's one spectrum. The more that I have allowed my painful feelings to process, the greater joy and happiness I've experienced. I experience such joy on a daily basis, regardless of what the circumstances of my life are, because I'm present to myself and I have learned to befriend that emotional body that just simply needed my love. And when I
Mm-hmm.
was able to give that love back to myself, what I realized is that there have been lessons and growth in absolutely everything. And some of the most uncomfortable feelings and the most uncomfortable circumstances and the most painful things I've been through have given me my greatest lessons, my greatest teachings. And I believe that the soul comes here to be in the human experience to grow. And that if we're in a body, we're in a body for a reason. So we are here to be in humanness. We are here to have the physicality, and we are here to have the emotional bodies. And so often we resist the very experience that we're here to get what our soul most needs.
And as you say that, I think it's something that you said earlier about this idea of like it's great to say this is what I need to be doing and this is how I need to be experienced. Like this is the most useful way for me to engage with my emotions. And as we are getting to that particular place, the emotion about the emotion sometimes is the issue that we have to start with. And I
Yes.
love tapping on the emotion about an issue before I tap on the issue. That I always think about the emotion I have about the issue is kind of like the hard candy shell before I can get to that gooey center that is inside of there. And if I'm feeling disappointed, overwhelmed, frustrated because I'm having this emotional experience, I am not going to be able to be fully present to do any sort of processing of that emotional experience because I'm saying the emotional experience is wrong. And so doing what you're saying and starting with the emotion I have about the fact I'm feeling this and dealing with that first, and we do that consistently, then we're going to start getting to the place where you are now, where it's like, okay, I can actually step in and experience the emotion because like you've been talking about, these are not intellectual choices. Like my emotional response to my emotions was not a logical thing that happened. Therefore, I need to deal with the emotion in the non-logical way, the way we clear stuff about the issue before we get to the issue itself. And it's really interesting that we can be in a circumstance where there's the emotion about the issue and the emotion about the emotion about the issue and the emotion, like, and we can feel like we're a million miles away from it. But as we slowly chip away, it's like the issue is this big, I think of it like a gobstopper, and the red is gone, and then the green is gone, and then the blue is gone. And once we actually get to the issue, it's this tiny little sweet tart in the middle that is easy for me to crush with my teeth, because I've done the work of going through these layers of this hard shell and giving ourselves permission to gently work our way from the outside in until we're in a position where we can effectively engage honestly with that emotion that's on the inside.
Well, you know, one of the things that EFT really taught me is that my anger, which was pretty much the only thing I could ever feel,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't my anger at all. It was simply the baseline. It was simply the top. It was simply the cover. And that underneath it was the anxiety, the sadness, the grief, and the fear. And so, you know, that is the joy of what tapping is we just get to start with where we are. And
Mm-hmm.
from that place of where we are, telling the truth about how we feel and how we're experiencing it and what it looks like, and allowing ourselves to be toxic, allowing ourselves to say those things that aren't socially acceptable and that we're told not to feel, that is the entrance way. That is the entrance way to who we truly are. I it was so amazing to me to realize that what was underneath my anger were all of these other things that I couldn't feel. But anger gave me this false sense of power that I relied on.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to what was underneath it, you're right. Once you get to the nucleus, it's like,
And it's really interesting. And I'm like, so for 2.5 years, I taught anger management in a county jail. The people I were working with were men who came from urban, socially economic lower classes, and they were in a circumstance in which the only negative emotion that they were culturally allowed to have was anger.
right,
And with the
got it.
exception of when your mom or your grandma died, you're allowed to be sad when your mom and your grandma died. Not when your dad died, but when your mom and your grandma died, you were allowed to be sad.
Right.
But everything else they had to do, what you're talking about is all of the negative emotions. The funnel it came out of was anger, because insecurity, fear, sadness, those were all signs of weakness. And some of my guys were literally alive because of their anger. Like, their anger gave them the
100%.
energy to fight their way out of actual physical
Yes.
danger as they were
Yes.
navigating that. And so it's interesting that you're reporting, like, the baseline was anger, because in some ways, like, we have decided culturally that, like, that is a little more tolerable and acceptable. It might not be the place we want to live, but it doesn't feel like it's like we failed if we're feeling it the way we do with some of those other emotions.
Yeah, it really has a sense of power to it. But of course it's not authentic power. It's
Yeah.
being out of control kind of power. But it has that strength that is a part of it. And at some point that felt real to me. That felt like something that was okay for me, even though as women, that's kind of an unusual experience, I think, because
Yeah.
a lot of women are not in touch with their anger at all. But for
Yeah.
me, there were times that my anger saved my life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so that's why when I talk to people about their feelings and they're like, I shouldn't be feeling this way, and that's really wrong. And often, as a spiritual teacher, I'm working with a lot of spiritual people who immediately are rushing to the end result. Well, I'm starting here, but that person didn't mean it, and they didn't really feel that way, and they really had a terrible time, and I should be more compassionate. And it's such a spiritual bypass. And so one of my main missions is to move into spiritual communities to talk to them about that spiritual bypass and say, it's not going away, guys. It's
Yeah.
still there. And then it comes out in passive aggressive ways or aggressive ways. It disrupts communities. It brings those communities down because people aren't just allowing themselves to feel what they're feeling.
So I'm cognizant of the time, and there's actually some folks that are mentioning this in the chat that I want to make sure we're honoring. I would love for us to have an opportunity to just do some tapping off of the things that we've been doing, whatever the entry point is that you want. I'm your echo. Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So for everybody that's listening, I want you to find a recent uncomfortable feeling, recent. And I want you to just think about it in your mind. Even though I don't want to feel this,
Even though I don't want to feel this.
even though this is not okay,
Even though this is not okay.
even though I'm wrong or bad for feeling this,
Even though I'm wrong or bad for feeling this.
for just right now,
For just right now.
I'm entertaining the notion
I'm entertaining the notion
that it's okay to be where I'm at.
it's okay for me to be where I'm at.
Even though I don't like this feeling at all.
Even though I don't like this feeling at all.
And I'm judging myself for having it.
And I'm judging myself for having it.
For just this moment.
For just this moment.
I'd like to take a chance.
I'd like to take a chance.
On being where I'm at.
And being where I'm at.
Even though this feels awful.
Even though this feels awful.
I want to run away and avoid it.
I want to run away and avoid it.
And what kind of person am I to be feeling this?
And what kind of person am I to be feeling this?
For just this moment.
For just this moment.
I'm summoning my courage.
I'm summoning my courage.
And allowing myself to be where I'm at.
And allowing myself to be where I'm at.
Okay. This feeling.
This feeling.
I don't like it at all.
I don't like it at all.
I don't want to be feeling this.
I don't want to be feeling this.
Why do feelings have to be so hard?
Why do feelings have to be so hard?
I've tried talking myself out of it.
I've tried talking myself out of it.
But that hasn't gotten me very far.
That hasn't gotten me very far.
I don't like this.
I don't like this.
I don't want to be feeling this.
I don't want to be feeling this.
This hurts.
This hurts.
It's wrong.
It's wrong.
Whatever happened.
Whatever happened.
That's making me feel this way.
That's making me feel this way.
It was wrong.
It was wrong.
And I don't want to be here with this.
And I don't want to be here with this.
I want to put on Netflix.
I want to put on Netflix.
I want to have a drink.
I want to have a drink.
I want to eat some chocolate.
I want to eat all the chocolate.
This is unacceptable.
This is unacceptable.
I'm unacceptable.
I'm unacceptable.
Bad people feel this way.
Bad people feel this way.
This is wrong.
This is wrong.
I don't want this.
I don't want this.
Get this feeling out of me.
Get this feeling out of me.
I'll do anything to change this.
I will do anything to change this.
But not sit with it.
But not sit with it.
I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
But for just right now.
But for just right now.
I'm going to slow down.
I'm going to slow down.
And just be where I'm at.
And just be where I'm at.
Emotions are not logical.
Emotions are not logical.
This is just my experience.
This is just my experience.
This is just what I'm feeling right now.
This is just what I'm feeling right now.
All feelings are temporary.
All feelings are temporary.
I'm finding the courage within me.
I'm finding the courage within me.
To just be present to what is.
To just be present to what is.
Running away hasn't been very effective.
Running away has not been very effective.
Maybe I can take a chance on allowing.
Maybe I can take a chance on allowing.
I'd like to allow.
I would like to allow.
I'd like to slow down.
I'd like to slow down.
I'd like to stop judging myself for this.
I'd like to stop judging myself for this.
I'd like to stop judging this emotion as bad.
I'd like to stop judging this emotion as bad.
Being human means having an emotional body.
Being human means having an emotional body.
And I'm learning to be present with that part of me.
And I'm learning to be present with that part of me.
and to welcome all of its gifts.
And to welcome all of its gifts.
On the other side of this is joy.
On the other side of this is joy.
And I'm welcoming more joy into my life than ever before.
I'm welcoming more joy into my life than ever before. One of the things I really liked in the middle of that, and I can't remember the exact phrase because I have tapping brain, is this idea of not making a statement of I'm changing, but instead making the change statement of I would like to. So you're stating a preference. You're not commanding the emotional self and the subconscious mind to change. And, you know, I've said this multiple times in the last 11 hours. Like, I think of my subconscious mind as a willful 6-year-old, and a willful 6-year-old does a very bad job when it's being told what to do. And being in
if yours is 6, mine's probably about 2.5.
There you go. And actually, it probably depends on the day of the week. But it just does a very bad job of being told what to do. And being in a circumstance is to be able to be comfortable and just say, my preference is. And and this is something that's showing up in my life, all sorts of places, not just with myself, but the people in my life. It's like, my preference is this. My preference is we do this. My preference is we don't do this. And it just creates such a different conversation than saying, this is what I want or this is what I would like. I'm saying, and there are things that, like, there are times that there are things in my life that aren't negotiable, that I'm going to say, this is what has to happen for me to be safe and healthy. But this preference language has been so useful. And I love the idea of using that preference language when I'm talking to my internal emotional self and saying, hey, this is what I'd like to have happen. Can we come to some sort of agreement and step into that in that particular way?
Well, when I first started tapping, all I wanted to do was get rid of all of the pain.
Yeah.
And what I realized was the pain in many ways was my teacher, and if I could just allow it and befriend it and be compassionate to it, that it would reveal itself to me, and on the other side, I'd be brought back into balance. And so it's been such an incredible, 20 years of tapping. My God, the way that it has changed for me. It's one of the reasons why I say for just this moment, that's part of my setup phrase, because you can do anything for a moment, and I'm asking them to give me just a moment for a new possibility, rather than saying I deeply and completely love and accept myself, our traditional phrase that we were all raised on in our
Yep.
EFT early days. Wasn't really effective for me because I didn't really buy into it. So this gentle way allows us to get much further, much more quickly, I have found.
And as you say that, like, it's one of the reasons why I always kind of bristled at the fact that Gary called it emotional freedom technique, because, like, I understand where that name comes from, because when there's this release, there's this sense of freedom, but somewhere in that is the implication that the goal is to get rid of the emotions. And
Right.
I don't want to be free of my emotions. What I want is a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. And sometimes a proportionate, well-informed emotional response is a really, really, really strong emotional response. And it is proportionate, it is well-informed, because it's exactly where I'm at. And giving ourselves permission to recognize the goal is not to free of our emotions. The goal is to experience our emotions in a natural, healthy way. And for me, like, when I got my arms wrapped around that, it really transformed the way I did work for myself. And it really transformed the way I work with my clients, because it changed the goal. The goal was not to be free. The goal was to be healthy.
Exactly. I had the same thing happen in my journey too. And I'm so incredibly grateful for all of the time that we've put into it. I quoted you on Instagram, and I you said that tapping takes minutes to learn and a lifetime to master. There is no end, there is no glass ceiling, there is no finite anything in the work that we are doing. It just continues to grow and evolve. And I'm grateful that I was able to come on here and share some of this with you.
I so appreciate your time, Kris. And, as much as I appreciate your time, I truly appreciate your friendship and the fact that we've gotten a chance to just cultivate that over the course of the last number of years as well. So thank you very much for showing up and sharing your amazing giftedness as you're up in Maine this weekend.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Awesomeness. Excellent.